young Japanese American and a seasoned veteran of yesterday's war. It's 20-odd years since Pearl Harbor, but two ancient opponents are moving into position for a battle in an attic, crammed with skeletons, souvenirs, mementos, old uniforms, and rusted metals. Ghosts from the dim reaches of the past that will lead us into the Twilight Zone.
Ooh, I'm already intrigued. Okay, everyone, just for reference, there was no end of last week's Serling clip introducing the next episode due to the fact that this episode actually got banned until fairly recently, in all things considered. So the original cut, which did have a Rod Serling outro, never got preserved for the DVD run. So that's why we had a clip from the episode featuring one Mr. Serling. But yeah, this sounds like a serious one. This sounds deep.
I'm going to jump in with a pre-rating.
Ooh.
I'm going to say 10.
Ooh. Interesting.
Guess what? There's nothing that says confidence in your concept like two guys in a room for 25 minutes talking or fighting. Guess what? That means you have confidence in your dialogue, you have confidence in their conflict, you have confidence in your characterization. You believe that they can sell it just on that alone, so I'm going to give it a 10.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
yes.
It's going to be a 10 for me too, because the fact that it was banned automatically means that there's something good in there, right?
Something juicy in there.
Yeah.
Neat. Some real World War II tension dialogue happening, which could be interesting.
Dan, what about you?
I'm going to start at 8. The fact that we're kind of limited to a single scene here, and this seems kind of like it's going to be a one-act play. Maybe a fantastic idea for a story or a treatment, but I'm not sure if it's going to translate as well to television. So that remains to be seen for me.
Okay, Shy.
I'm still going to rate it a 10.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. You've already gone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because that other guy who said it was going to be a 10, I like the cut of his jib. So,
thank you.
Go on, Otto.
Yeah, this, like The Obsolete Man, this is going to be another one that I chewed on quite a lot. I will pre-rate this 8.5 rods out of 10. I think it's a very powerful episode. I think that it needed to be banned, and I really wish that it hadn't, because I wish more people could have seen this, but I kind of wish that they hadn't. Just, it's complicated, but we'll get into it. I think it's a great episode.
Okay, I'll give this. I'll go 8 as well, tentative. It seems like it's going to be good, not for the fact it's just got George Takai in it, or Mr. Sulu from Star Trek, but also that this is a very powerful topic being spoken quite early on in racial, relations when America is definitely not at its finest. So, yeah, very understandable. But let's go and watch and see what we think.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Welcome everyone to the Holodeck, our trek through things that are not Star Trek, and this week we're brought to The Encounter, an episode starring one young George Takai, also known as Mr. Sulu from the original series of Star Trek. Also, why was this episode brought before us? I probably know the reason. We all know it as avid Star Trek fans that we are. But come on. Why are we here?
I don't envy you your job, because sometimes we get these episodes and you have to follow it up with an intro and you sound a little bit perky and welcome people in.
Hey!
And sometimes that's difficult. Yeah. So this was chosen. This is part of our Trek alum series. We have a couple Shatner episodes, and this is obviously starring George Takei. So that is the reason it was chosen.
And this was quite an intense episode. I feel like we just all watched it together for people who are wondering. And this is probably the only time we've watched an episode and no one spoke a word. Like, literally, I think one word was spoken by me, just kind of going, what happened? But that was it. Like, literally.
There were exactly 2 instances of talking. They were both you idle. The first one. No, here's the thing. This is a testament, because the first one was, why the fuck did they never use George Takei like this on Star Trek? And then the second one was, wait, what happened? But guess what? Nothing.
Yeah,
there was a bad joke by Idol in there too. So
probably there usually is. But yeah, no, gosh, let's go straight into it. George Takai, I have never seen him act like that in any Star Trek production. Holy cow, what were they sitting on all this time? Like, he was incredible. The depth of range from just like his outbursts to just that pensive look he has when he's addressed from sorry, I forget the other guy's name, the
Neville Brand, Mr. Fenton.
Mr. Fenton. When he's over the road from Mr. Fenton, over the scene from Mr. Fenton, and just exuding this kind of anxious energy that he can't quite explain, and that was really good. Made me see George Takai in a little bit of a new light, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's like, guess what? Like, it's almost a shame that I got banned, because, like, if I were him, I would have used that as my audition tape for the rest of my entire goddamn life. Like, that's 25 minutes, here's why you should climb me, and you're gonna climb me. Like, fucking Christ.
So one of the sins of this episode is, I think they underwrote Taro Takamori, I think his name is. They underwrote the role for George Takei. And I kind of get it. Neville Brand, if that was all acting, then goddamn what an actor. Because I can count on probably two fingers the number of characters in Twilight Zone who elicited that kind of emotional reaction from me. But yeah, George, when he had his chance, was great. But we had a 90-second snippet where he was, he hung the moon. Outside of that, it was mostly him responding to Mr. Fenton. So I would have liked more from him, more script, more dialogue. But yeah, they both killed it. Like we said ahead of time, when you put two guys in the room, you better be sure what you're doing. And just from a performance standpoint, wow.
Yeah,
you touched on something for Neville Brand. I mean, it's that if that was acting, that was Oscar worthy, Emmy worthy. But no, he apparently, from his Wikipedia page, he was a decorated, the third highest decoration, Silver Star for valor in the U.S. military. He's those medals may have actually been his own, who knows? But yeah, he was channeling something in this performance.
Definitely. I mean, this is the kind of like racial, interactions you see across all America at that time. 1964, like, this is bang right in the middle of I can't remember when did segregation stop.
The Vietnam War.
Yeah, the Vietnam War. Well. We also, segregation in the US, culture, and that's something that's still going today. Unfortunately, we still have these kind of attitudes, even though we are long past a war.
Well, they even refer to it at the top of the episode as yesterday's war.
Yeah.
So it's still very much in the psyche of America. And yeah, what perfect casting. You have a highly decorated war veteran, and Asian American who grew up in the internment camps during that yesterday's war. So it could not be more perfectly cast.
If you guys will indulge me, I was going to say this for later, but since we're all a little bit stunned from the episode, I want to give you a timeline of certain events that happened that will kind of help frame. Some people still, why was it banned? And some of us are like, it's fucking obvious why it was banned. But so let me try to set the stage here. December 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. 2 months later, February 1942, President Roosevelt signs an executive order giving the military the right to exclude anyone from their bases based on ethnicity. In the following months, additional orders were passed, which resulted in more than 125,000 Japanese Americans being forcibly placed in internment camps, including a 5-year-old George Takei. November 1955, the official start of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, which lasted 20 years. This Twilight Zone episode, The Encounter, aired in 1964. A few months later, in August of 1964, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorizing President Lyndon Johnson to take any measures he believed were necessary to retaliate and to promote the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia. In 1978, the Japanese American Citizens League formed a redress committee for their grievances over Japanese American treatment following Pearl Harbor. The next year, 1979, Senate bill was passed to introduce U.S. actions to address U.S. actions against Japanese Americans and provide reparations. 2 years later, George Takei testified in California in front of the Commission on Wartime Relocation. For about the next decade, they bandied back and forth whether or not we are actually going to address what we did to Japanese Americans. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was passed, gave surviving Japanese Americans reparations and a formal apology by President Ronald Reagan for their incarceration. George Takai was one of those who received reparations and donated his redress check to the Japanese American National Museum in L.A. Bit of a jump forward. December 2015, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump calls for, quote, a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the U.S. Less than 1 month later, this episode, The Encounter, re-enters television syndication. 1 year after that, executive order passed by Donald Trump, known colloquially as the Muslim ban. That put a cap on refugees admitted to the U.S., suspended U.S. refugees admission program. More than 700 travelers were detained and up to 60,000 visas were provisionally revoked. So we have some non-American viewers, some non-Americans here. And this is all to say that when I first watched Encounter, it was criticized and they pulled it from syndication because of the storyline of the Japanese American being a traitor, which there is no evidence of in real life. And I thought, well, what's the problem? It's fiction, right? Like we can delineate fiction from reality. If some Japanese TV show painted Americans as a traitor, I wouldn't have a problem with that. The issue is I didn't live in a time where 100,000 Japanese Americans were interned on U.S. soil. And that timeline I gave you spanned, it was 46 years from the time of those relocation camps to the time that the government admitted, oh yeah, we fucked up. And I think in the minds of some people, does Arthur's father being a traitor somehow justify those internment camps? And I think for a lot of people it probably did. There are a lot of Mr. Fentons out there who hate people based on the color of their skin. And so we have the luxury, a lot of us, of not getting the whole history. But I think if we were there, if there's a giant decades-long culture war, hatred of people of a certain skin tone, I have a better understanding now of why this was banned. It's not just a matter of this is a fictional story. No, it flew too close to the sun and was a little bit too real for the period.
Well said.
Yeah, no, that there is a lot of heady context going into this, and just like I think we've mentioned before in one of our previous Twilight Zone episodes that a lot of these episodes cannot be transposed. You could not really make this show now because there's a certain cultural context that's kind of intrinsic to this that means that you can't remake the Twilight Zone again. You can only make Black Mirror. It's these shows and these anthologies are so culturally located that you couldn't really. I feel like you could maybe do a decent take on this with something like the Gulf War. Maybe, if you wanted to. I imagine that would also probably get banned nowadays, given how maybe there'd be a bit more sort of leniency on that, depending on stuff like Black Hawk Down and Gran Torino and all that kind of thing. But
yeah, there is a propensity to Americanize it a little bit. I mean, kind of what you get in 24. There's a lot of that kind of reaction.
I think a remake would be Muslims because of what's happened in recent years.
Exactly. It'd be the Gulf War. But man, fucking. I think probably we're gonna get into it when we do our bread, of course, but just the sheer amount of just zinger lines that they each get of just cutting right to the heart of it, because we've talked before about 25 minutes you fucking say your piece and you go, but just Mr. Fenton going on about the dehumanization of the enemy and the creation of the perfect killing machine. 1 minute we're told you're a species of ape, the next we're told you're a highly cultured. It's fuck, that.
Cuts. He's kind of the most self-realized racist we have. He knows his faults. It's kind of really strange because I think Otto, you kind of said when we were talking about the aggressive wife of the last episode, you said to me you're gonna hate someone, you're gonna hate this guy, and I was like, I kind of don't hate him. He's wrong. He's definitely got a bad attitude, but he is weirdly self-realizing about it all. He sort of sits there and goes oh, they told me this, I told you he has almost got to the kind of O'Brien, I don't hate you Cardassian, I hate what I became because of you little bit, hints of that in there.
There's almost a degree to his character where it's he realizes what's happened to him enough that he can be angry and tormented and know that it's wrong, but he doesn't have the capacity to move beyond it and grow and do anything but wallow and wish for death.
And he lost his
job
for it.
Yeah, that's worse than either one. It's like it would be easier to hate him if he were just a snub-nosed racist who just fucking yeah, no, I did the right thing in what I did, or if he was like a completely redeemed, like, oh, I did awful things like what we did to you guys. No, he's somewhere in between where even he just like slides back and forth, this seesaw of just indecision and self-hatred and externalized hatred, and it's just, man, he really fucking blew the top off. But like, oh.
I'll put my marker down and come back to it. But Shy, Dan.
They clarify. So speaking stars about what you're talking about with him sliding in and out of this ingrained, inherent racism that he carries like a burden, and it's in how he addresses Arthur or Taro or Boy, and even when Arthur corrects him twice on the way that he's talking to him, he slips. He tries to be more formal and even repeats himself, Arthur, like he's trying to reassure himself that he can overcome what he can't ever get away from. It's who he was built up to be. He was raised probably at a very young age, probably about as young as Arthur, which is part of the resentment, to become a killer, and some really awful things. One of the things that stands out to me also is how they handle the American soldier, and then talk. I think we get some hints of Arthur's father and what he did that was traitorous, but the real atrocities are mentioned when what's his name? When Fenton talks about burning them out. My God, what an image! And just the fact that it's not explicitly said, but we know that he's killed not just one innocent but many, and that's why he has such a harsh reaction to the accusation. Just killing unarmed men, unarmed civilians. Even we don't know the depth and breadth of it, and it's not for us to really understand, I guess. And I'll point out too, I don't want to get too far away from the point here, but we're talking about Muslim Americans, and when I first found out about the Japanese internment camps, a much younger self of mine really assured myself, how could this ever happen again? We surely must have learned our lessons. And then, I'll have to point out that we may have 100,000 interned Mexican Americans on American soil right at this moment in detention camps across the border. And so, perhaps if that had a little more transparency and, a little more attention, like this episode really tried to give to the post-war men and women, maybe there'd be a little more empathy to the situation. Shy.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really learn. We never. History is just a circle. This episode is prophetic, as you were talking about them burning out the enemy, and it's on the verge, on the eve of American involvement in the Vietnam War. Of course, we are familiar with the sort of napalming and use of chemical weapons in that conflict. Yeah, and I experienced this sort of casual racism growing up. I really still do, but so it was interesting and encouraging to see Takei's character sort of just standing up for himself, because often as a first generation, you just kind of take it and you smile and you move along. So but at the same time, it was interesting that you're talking about how Fenton has just enough self-knowledge to be haunted by his actions in World War II, right? If he was just a straight up rah-rah American racist, he'd be fine with just following orders and take no prisoners, which I was wondering if that was the reason it was banned, because they were just detailing American war crimes during World War II, and maybe the higher-ups didn't think that was great for them. But yeah, he's actually haunted by that, so it makes him drink on the job and loses his job. He loses his wife, and he can't even commit to his racism against Takamori in this attic. As we're pulling in modern day politics, Trump even referred to his Muslim ban as being exactly what FDR did with the internment, and what was the difference, as though that was some sort of justification for his Muslim ban at the time. Yeah, this is just a really powerful, riveting episode of television. As you said at the top, Dan, it's done in the style of like a teleplay. It's two men in one room. It's got that sort of 12 Angry Men intensity.
I'm a sucker for
The-
that kind of stuff. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. The script is, there's a lot of repetition, and it's not like mammoth repetition. It's just sort of repetition.
I feel like kind of
but the
makes it
actors
a little. I don't know. I feel like that kind of makes it a little bit more authentic. Like it kind of feels like a real conversation that might
It does.
have happened.
Well,
Like,
it feels like they've been drinking. It's legit.
Yeah.
It feels as though they're on their third.
You want to see
can
how
of-
far I could throw this samurai sword? Like, yeah.
That's right. Exactly. And then there's the weird haunted spirit of the sword element that comes into it.
Yeah, the door
It
locking
still makes
itself.
it very. Well, as we discussed, that was just clearly air pressure. If they just cracked a window,
See, part of
the
my
door
brain was just like,
open,
did he lock it and then goes, oh no, this can't open? It's like almost like a misery situation. Like, you know, "Oh, you're trapped in here with me. You know,
They could have gone that way.
it could have. That's kind of what I was thinking.
All right, I want to circle back around to Fenton, because I understand what you're saying, and there is obviously a tragedy with a self-aware character who is a coward. He says, I'm scared. I'm ultimately to blame for my wife leaving me. I'm ultimately to blame for me losing this job. My cowardice. And partly it's him, partly it's the system. They told us you were pigs. You know,
Yeah.
I've been pushed and pulled every way till I just hated everyone. And you get that. And you do feel sorry for him to a point. But what I hate is the archetype, because, my God, you guys are so lucky not being in America right now and just being bombarded with this politically. There are Mr. Fentons on every street in America. And the back and forth, the repetition there, you know, I kind of like illustratively, because boy, or you're weak, or this or that. And then, God forbid, Arthur stands up for himself. I was just kidding. You're taking it too hard. You're a snowflake. I get to say whatever I want with no repercussions. And if you push back, it's your fault for being too sensitive. Fuck that, and fuck you, all the Fentons of the world. I better stop before I get all worked up.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's
well,
why I
I'll
like
tell you-
this characterization, because it's so true to real life.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
very
not
much
just so what you said about there's one on every street in America. So another facet to Fenton's character. This takes place about 20 years after World War II concluded. This, in real time. This is when the episode was filmed, and so at that time, war veterans were in their 40s, their 50s, middle-aged men, approaching the end of their career, but not quite there yet. But if we take it a little further out, there are literally homeless, aging veterans who have lost their jobs, lost their wives, who are unable to cope with what haunts them on the streets. And another aspect that this I don't really know. There's not a lot that I've learned about World War I veterans and their impact on society and how they were treated. It's just so far removed, and the media is really just literature. So it's not something that I've been exposed to. But I have to imagine that if this episode had taken place, in modern day, if we'd be talking about a different demographic in the homeless veteran population. But I feel like, sure. I mean, the racism is just looking for an opportunity to be let out. And what you mentioned about Trump's invoking the Japanese internment as a justification. I think in a lot of ways it's more of I guess they call it a dog whistle, just a coded racism message to his followers, and that's the most disgusting part about it, is that for him it's a selling point.
To just follow quickly on that point of the World War I aspect, that absolutely was a societal especially in England. Like, I did an entire course in English literature about World War I poetry, about Wilfred Owen, about that entire generation, and just like the shell shock and the accusations of cowardice for refusing to be the first one up over the wall, or the first one to say, maybe I don't want to shoot these people. Conscientious objectors, number of people who were thrown into asylums for refusing to fight. it cuts every which way. There is no way to win in these situations. So that's a bit of interesting context. I want to kind of circle back around to something what you said, that like Takai gets like that kind of that one big monologue where he's talking about where Arthur or Taro is talking about his father, and the rest of it's Fenton. It's like, I don't know, man. I was watching like Takai like a fucking hawk, just watching what he was doing a lot of the time. Just
pensive energy.
A lot, like the sheer anxiety exuding off of him, the sheer energy, the slips between defensiveness to I want to say something, but I know if I do, this is going to go down a really fucking road I don't know where it's going to go. To just even he had a glimmer of sympathy, but then it's just like, no, you're a fucking piece of shit. Just like he may not have had as many lines as Fenton. Like Fenton was by all means like more vocal, but I think Takai easily just like matched the energy and was telling just as much of a story with him as his physical performance.
I was only talking about him being underwritten. Like we've all said, great performances from both of them. So before we get too far away from it, I want to. This might be my only chance. I want to bring up my Uncle Paul, who I love very much. He's my spirit animal, but he was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and now in his late 70s, he's battled cancer off and on for many years, and he's very much anti-war, anti-violence, anti-gun at this point in his life. But he says the only good thing that came out of that war for him is when he goes to get his radiation treatments and they want you to sign for the payment, he just signs VA, Veterans Association, is it? They cover all his bills. And so, we don't have the time to go into all the consequences of that. But I just think of him as someone who, because behind Mr. Fenton, like we said, if you set aside the racism for a second, there's obviously they're both tormented, but there's a tormented man who wishes that he could have been pushed down a different path than the one he was pushed down. Let me break things up with a little bit of behind the scenes here. Robert Butler, the director, said, quote, "I recollect some discussions with producer William Fraug about what does the audience get out of this? What are we doing? I just wanted to know. I didn't want to rewrite or anything. I was just sort of curious. And I think he did not take kindly to my question. It's a terrific show, but harsh, isn't it? I still don't know what it's saying. I don't know why someone decided to do that on Twilight Zone. Mystery still." During the shoot, George Takai met Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling. Quote, "I was lucky enough to be there when he did his intros and closes," Takai said. "He sounded just the same and looked just the same as he did on TV. He was very gracious and thanked me for doing such a tough role. I was a great admirer of his writing."
I don't know what we're doing here, guy. Come on.
It's like you're saying, like he's like, I don't know what the message is. I don't know what's like. Yeah, no, it's clearly painfully obvious. Like this isn't. But I kind of agree with the fact of like, what's this doing on the Twilight Zone? This is probably like the least Twilighty Zone episode that I've come across. Aside from a kind of like, apart from the samurai sword kind of having its own mystic energy and the door locking by itself, this kind of felt more like a morality play that should be sort of told to an audience rather than spooky tale.
I have to point out that all the episodes of Twilight Zone we've watched.
Okay, you know what I mean. This is more a traditional morality play without having anything supernatural influencing it.
It's because just a random happenstance of these two people meeting, right? That's what the Twilight Zone is. Just like, well, other than the aliens coming in and cooking us, but like, it's just what happens if just the randomness of the universe makes these circumstances happen at this exact moment, and let's see what happens at that moment.
Yeah, it's a laser focus on a very specific part of the human psyche, which is what I feel like the Twilight Zone is meant to be. That's what there's a reason why it's in between imagination and superstition. It's like it's all those negative emotions and all that stuff that doesn't come out in polite conversation because it's harsh. Like the director didn't seem. Guess what? Just because things are harsh doesn't mean you don't talk about them. There's a degree to which catharsis is an idea dating all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Like you kind of need to address these things and talk about them. And guess what? Sometimes they have violent ends, but Is that better than dying a quiet death in your attic surrounded by memorabilia?
Right.
And
we, yeah, it answers the question: what if Mr. Sulu met Biff after he got knocked out by George McFly at the under the sea? Then so.
Oh wow. Another fun fact: George Takei didn't actually audition for the role. He was specifically
Really?
requested by the director. Well, by director Bob Butler, not the director of this episode. But yeah, he was specifically asked for because he has had a few. He has been on TV sort of on and off. I think he was in.
he was in Roddenberry's old, what is it, Lieutenant? Or
the Lieutenant. Yeah, he was in that as well. So he's been. I think.
Well, like Shai mentioned, you have a World War II vet and someone who is in an internment camp. Like,
yeah.
Mr. Serling doesn't abide subtext, so of course he's going to go for that kind of.
Yeah. I also find it. Yeah. So I find it interesting. So I had a quick peek at the actor for Mr. Neville Brand, who
I honestly thought was Baloo from the Jungle Book. He had the same voice, but it wasn't, sadly.
Yeah. And I find it really, really interesting that so as you mentioned, he's a war hero. He served in the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division in the European theater. Which is interesting because, like, I don't know if this is just something I've internalized, but I feel like there's very much a narrative of the European theater being the virtuous war because you're fighting the Nazis, you're fighting the fascists, you're fighting the axis of evil. And then there's the narrative of, the Asian theater and it just being a lot messier and a lot more, because Pearl Harbor, I don't want to say that it was like, it was not done completely out of nowhere. There were reasons that happened, oil embargoes, etc. There were moves, there were political things. There's a lot of build up to that dating back to like the 20s, the 30s. Like, as you say, history is a circle, but it does. There's a line you can follow. But I just found it really interesting that you grab like a guy from the European theater and make him act out. And obviously there's certain commonalities and more, but I just find it interesting that because I can't imagine there would have been any shortage of Japanese veterans. But I just find it interesting. I don't know. I don't have much more to tug on that point, but I just find it interesting, of different narratives of war and how certain wars become virtuous in the mind and other ones don't. Like, you know what World War II is called? What used to be called in Soviet Russia? It used to be called the Great Patriotic War. It used to be called World War II. Like, stuff like that, I always find really interesting on how people frame their wars.
Propaganda still exists these days with the framing of wars. The history is written by the victor or often whoever has the biggest stick, stone, or speaker. So there you have it.
I want to hit one more cardinal sin here because I don't want to let it slide under the radar. I talked about them blaming a Japanese American for being a traitor, which, again, no evidence that ever happened, and that's ultimately why it was pulled. But one thing I think is kind of insidious is they draw an equivalency here as though these two are both paying for the same level of sin, and they're really not. One guy committed war crimes, the other guy's dad did something bad while he had to watch. And they even go so far as to have him kill Fenton at the end to try to make him not necessarily the bad guy, but like, oh, now you have something to pay for too. And I didn't like that. Because if anyone, is the bad guy in the story, it's not the kid who had to deal with that his whole life, I don't think.
No. See, the thing is, I heard, because the instant he tells that first story of his father as a great war hero, it's like, okay. And then that was a lie. That's not what really happened. And then he tells the second story. And I'm like, okay, so are we meant to assume that second story is the truth? Or am I meant to assume that that's another lie? Is this like, because the instant you tell one lie, your veracity in general kind of becomes a bit foggier. So I was almost wondering, like, is he inciting like Fenton to come at him so he has an excuse? Like, I honestly thought there was going to be like a plot development with the sword where like he recognized something else on it, and that was going to be a reason behind that. I don't know. I didn't feel like, maybe this is just a modern sensibility and like maybe my approach to it, but I didn't feel like Arthur was being villainized by the or Tara was being villainized by the story at all. I felt like he was very much just an innocent being dragged into one guy's fucking psychodrama. And you can read into the sword as much as you want, because like the Wikipedia article seems to indicate, oh, he's being possessed by the spirit of sword. And it's like, I don't think it's quite that oblique. I don't think it's quite that cut and dry. There's ebbs and flows of like is this nervous anxiety? Is this energy coming out? Is this trauma? Is this a lie people are telling to make themselves feel better or to make themselves the villain? Like, it's interesting the interplay going on here, but I can understand why it got banned. But like, I don't know, I don't come out of this seeing Arthur as the villain.
Well, not as the villain,
wait.
but more as though they're presented like equivalently in some capacity, which I didn't like.
Okay, let's go on to our bread, the moment that stood out to you in the episode. Dan, start with you.
There was a moment when Fenton smiles. And I'm not sure if anybody else caught it, but right when swords are drawn, and Taro is holding the samurai sword, and he pulls out what looks like either a bayonet or something, and Fenton hides behind the draped over Japanese flags and has his pick sticker out, and there's a small hint of a smile that creeps on his face, and that's gonna haunt me.
Shy.
That's a good pick.
I think it's the moment at the end of I almost called him Sulu, at the end of Takei's monologue when he is screaming screaming in Japanese like he was Japanese when he was screaming as a child in his made up story, and he turns and the camera is a low angle and he slams onto the table or whatever it is, and then admits that that's not actually what happened. That was just as you were saying in the moment, we never got to see that breath of emotion from Takei during Star Trek, and so it was great to see that. Although I did chuckle during the exact scene that Dan was talking about, when Fenton plays peekaboo with the Japanese flag, it kind of rips it down. It's like looking there, it made me laugh. You know, fight choreography is always going to be dated from year to year. So, but it was amusing. But yeah, that's the strong moment for me.
Go Auto.
Stars, you look like you were about to bust. Yeah.
I was just gonna say like Shy took the one I was gonna go for, so I need time to think of my one.
All right. Man, there's so many, isn't there? For a 2-room or a 1-room, 2 actors, you could open a bakery out of this episode. Thank you for the chuckle. I needed that.
That's very nice. Yeah. We're making it a bit bread. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a series of moments, and you could tell because it got me heated earlier. Every time Fenton tried to push him, every time he tried to cut into him and undersell him, I was just kidding. Have another beer. Oh, you're too sensitive. God, that really gets my goat. Great acting job. Good writing in that area, because that evoked emotion from me like few other roles have done in Twilight Zone. Bread. Sorry.
I'll give you a little bit more time, Stars. My bread was definitely Arthur's banzai at the end as he jumps out the window completely at random. I was just like, was not expecting that whatsoever. It's just like, I thought he'd kill him and then, just slink off and, the sword of avenge himself. No, he just jumps out the window and I presume kills himself. Like, I assume the earlier reference of them saying like, oh yeah, this too high up to climb out the window was a little bit of a Chekhov's gun to say like, no, this is maybe going to pay off later, and it was. And yeah, he commits suicide essentially by jumping out the window in a rather manic way. That kind of stuck out to me as a bit of a, that's weird. That kind of took me out of it a little bit, but there you are. Stars, what's your bread?
My loaf of bread is probably there's sort of 2 images for me. The first one is actually the first time you see Takei in the episode, when you see it from the downward shot down the staircase. He's got the hat on, and he just has this like perfect innocence to him. Like he's very boy next door almost. Like he's just, it doesn't hurt that like that's the youngest I've ever seen him. Like this is the first time I've ever seen him like before Star Trek. But like the combination of the hat, the very well, he just looks like a good guy.
Shirt tucked
and it's
in.
like, Yeah, and like you've already gotten to get an idea of what kind of person Fenton is by that point. So it's like you feel instantly like, oh, dude, you're in for a fucking rough time here. I'm sorry. And then I think just like it's part of the same like monologue that Shai pointed out, but just like the way he just works, like the way Takei just works himself into just like a complete sweat, and the way he's looking up into the sky, and you can kind of into at the ceiling, obviously, but it's like he's looking at that sky again. Just like that complete feeling of transportation. Like, yeah, no, I fucking Idol said it. Like, how did you not use this guy more on Star Trek? This is what you can do in 25 minutes. Imagine what you could do with 45. Imagine what you could do with a fucking like we were heaping praise on Shatner and like well, no, not heaping it, but like complimenting on him in this on the episode we did previously. It's like, no, I think Takei did a way better job here. Yeah, I'm gonna.
No. Let's just put icicles on him and strand him on a planet for an episode. But there's Shatner.
Yeah.
Let's do nothing.
No, just a fucking great actor.
Okay, time for.
Well, if that's the best they could do, this should last about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. We will retrace our steps and figure out what's going on.
You've got 5 minutes. Do it.
What would you change with the last 5 minutes of this episode, if anything at all? Let's go back around and start again with Dan. Dan, what would you tweak?
So I'd like for them to have leaned in a little bit more on the possibility that we still don't really admit that mental illness among veterans is real. There's a lot of progress that we've made, but certainly at the time, I'm sure that it wasn't really spoke about. But this episode kind of alludes to it. All of the discussions taking place in the attic and in the brain. And so I'd like for the conclusion to be a little bit more Twilight Zone-y, that Taro's character never existed in real life. The entire episode is played out as
I'm literally just writing that now as my last 5 minutes.
Well, I'm picking the obvious ones each time, but I'm going to do it well. God damn it. So this is the day that Fenton had was going to commit suicide, and these are the dialogues that he had in his head. He's just lost everything. He's at rock bottom, and this is his final day on Earth, and these are the struggles that he's running through as he runs the sword through himself.
It's a good one.
Ashai.
I know this is an uncharacteristic Twilight Zone ending, but I would kind of liked it to have been a happier ending. I would have liked to
Don't worry, I picked a happy ending last time.
Yeah, I would have liked to have them to have been tussling and the swords just kind of precariously pointed upwards somewhere, like, and Fenton in the struggle starts to fall backwards onto the sword, and you see he's about to impale himself on the sword, and then Takei Takamori at some point tackles him out of the way or grabs him, and the sword just like he stops just right before the sword penetrates him, and he pulls him up, and they just kind of he realizes that he saved his life, and they kind of sit and then Takamori reaches over and cracks open the beer and hands it to him, and that's how the episode ends. But they went with the Exorcist ending, which is fine. But so it's a little more bleak and probably more right, yeah, and more true to actual reality. But I would have liked a little bit more optimism after such a heavy episode. But maybe I'm just weak. So
I'm going to jump in before anyone else steals my ideas for a second week running. And this literally I pulled this out my ass, and it's probably another reason to get this episode banned is by the end of the episode, they have a lot of back and forth, a lot of jobs, a lot of jibes back at each other, and eventually, start to come to a bit of a common realization about, the history together, and then they start to know each other a little bit better, and more so that they actually realize there's something between them, something a little common spark, and actually turns out they're rather interested in each other, and it turns out that, this is the veterans in different wars can make lovers in the same. No apologies.
In honor of a banned episode, I was trying to get this episode banned as well.
Exactly.
So.
I'm going to make it even more banned by doing that because my idea was stolen. So there we go. Already stars.
Don't call on me first.
Man.
I only myself to blame.
The fact that Idol's the one to go for the slash fic and I'm not. All right. Mine's a slight little tweak. I feel like it probably makes it a bit more Twilight Zone-y. So you have the same sort of pan down toward the door after they both like died, except that the door opens and Takamori's there again, and Fenton appears at the top of the stairs, gestures him up, and guess what? This is a thing that's going to repeat over and over and over again. Maybe Arthur steps over the threshold into the attic, and suddenly it becomes something else. Maybe it becomes the jungles of Honolulu or wherever that happened, and it's just maybe he's some kind of metaphysical reincarnation of the officer that was killed. Maybe, and then it's like a very an implication that this is going to keep on going because they just something binding the two. Like I don't like the idea of like a curse of the sword, but of just like these two misguided individuals who were driven against each other by nations, and they just can't stop killing each other. I don't know. There's something. I don't know. I feel like that works.
Yeah. That's great. Is there a future sci-fi scene where they're like in spacesuits fighting each other too?
Yes, absolutely.
The
and then it cuts back to them as cavemen, and they're killing each other like that. Like,
yes,
there's
yes.
so many variations. Yeah.
I could love that.
Battle will never end. Go on, Auto.
There's a little bit of what is it the TOS episode with the Belai and Loki.
Day of the Dove.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
no. You're thinking different one, but
Let this be our last battlefield. Or
that's the one. Yeah.
Auto.
Boy. Yeah, I didn't have anything prepared because I wasn't. For some reason, I didn't really want to think too much more about this episode. I don't like the ending. The stereotyping and the out of left field stuff. So all right, my last 5. Shut up, Otto. My last 5 is they get into the struggle again. Maybe one's baiting the other, and Fenton runs Arthur through with the sword, and he realizes what he's done. Dropped to the floor. He could pull off some great emotive reaction there. And then you hear Takei's voice, Mr. Fenton, and we see a shot. The door is swung open again. He's down at the bottom of the stairs. Mr. Fenton, I heard you could use some help. You could use help with a garden. And he looks back, and there's no body there. The sword isn't there. And so he realizes he has to replay this, hopefully in a healthier way than what went down the first time around. So I think we could all use some happy endings after
we could
this
do.
episode.
So let's end this the happiest way by giving out.
I can show you my rating code.
Schiller rating 3.5. Associational rating norm -3.
That's much too low a rating.
I'm just not accustomed to seeing an unsatisfactory rating on a member of my crew.
We're just not accustomed to it. So, Dan, I believe it's your turn. Do you have a rating criteria for this week?
Yeah, I've got to steal from the master again, right out of Serling's intro. Gentlemen, how many skeletons and rusted metals out of 10?
Ooh, good. Very good. I'm gonna unorthodox. I'm gonna go first on this one. I think I like this episode a lot. I think what it aims to achieve isn't Twilight Zone, but it's still something everyone should watch. I think this should live in a different series about ethical morality.
Because Twilight Zone doesn't do that.
But I mean, just without the spooky element. You know what I mean? Like, without saying, "Oh, we're diverting to the Twilight Zone." This is just like, "Hey, you should learn from this because this stuff's important." Like, But that being said, I am going to give it. I keep saying I'm divvying numbers in my head. I'm going to give it a 9. I really enjoyed that. It's an important thing to know, and especially considering it was banned for so long, and it's still excellent. And it's still gripping. It is, and I'm a sucker, like I've said before, for people in a room just talking and it being gripping and engaging. Like the fact that all of us were just stock silent when we were watching it was just, if we were doing watch-alongs, I would just I'm not publishing that because we didn't say a word. Like, why would we do that? But no, that is definitely a 9 from myself. Stars.
So I understand the criticisms, and I think the last 30 minutes I'll just kind of go a little bit nuts. Some of the fight choreography falls apart a little bit, but it's a 10. It's 10 rusted metals and skeletons out of 10 for me. Like, just in terms of sheer emotional gripping power, in terms of like a portrait of two individuals who are just ruined by war through no real fault of their own. Yeah, you can hate Fenton for what he became, but like I don't think there was ever an implication. I like to believe the best of people, that people aren't born to be evil. I don't believe that that's a thing. I don't believe that people are born to be like that. So just twisted and ruined. And just like in the performances and just yeah, no, guess what? This is the kind of stuff I wish I'd watched more of growing up, because like I watched a fair amount of stuff that kind of touched on this. These kind of like things, but just 25 minutes of just no, we're gonna fucking talk about it. I just appreciate how direct it was. Yeah, no, 10 for me.
Shy.
Yeah, I stick with a 10. This is a thing does not have to be perfect for it to be great. This is not a perfect episode, but it is undoubtedly a great episode. As you said, it is thoroughly riveting, it's thoroughly gripping. It's very timely. It addresses issues that are not super addressed. Obviously, we're entering into the civil rights period in America here, but you know, Asian Americans are so often sort of marginalized as like the model minority. So it was just not something that was talked about as much during those decades. So yeah, this addresses both the issues of civil rights and perhaps just as importantly, how to deal with a cursed samurai sword. And I wish as a kid this would have been released when I was growing up in syndication, because I would have watched the episode just because there was a samurai sword in the episode, and I would have inadvertently learned lessons, right? Like I'd be like, oh, katana. Well, I'm going to watch this episode. But yeah,
katana means Japanese sword.
That's right. Must watch.
Dan, please, your rating.
Yeah, so when Fenton's talking about the sword, one of the things he says about it, I've been trying to lose it for years, and I feel like I'm going to be trying to lose this episode from the forefront of my mind for the rest of the evening. It's this one will stick with me. Was it a great episode of TV? Yeah, I mean, was it a great Twilight Zone episode? I'm not so sure. There's some inherent uneasiness that we approach the depths to what a human can do to other humans. And so I guess if you're going to look for the horror show on TV and the sci-fi of what external forces can do to a person, you don't need to look a whole lot further than this. I'll upgrade slightly. I still can't give this a 10, but I was really happy to see Takai being let off the leash and to do what he really was capable of doing. So I'm going to upgrade to 9 skeletons and rusted metals out of 10.
Auto.
And shame on those who forgot the skeletons and rusted metal. We have a shtick. We have a shtick. Yeah, it's such a good episode. The things it does well, it does really, really well. Maybe some of the best in Twilight Zone. Yeah, Dan, you said, it's not great for Twilight Zone, but I don't know. I can see that, but the Twilight Zone we've been running through kind of has a theme in terms of storytelling, and I think this does hit it well, even though they're really light on supernatural elements. This episode educated me, and I would hope that if it wasn't banned, it would have educated a lot more people. Ultimately, I just think, though, it needed to be banned. They played with fire. It was too realistic, and some of the accusations, frankly, thrown around could have done a lot of damage in real life. 8.5 skeletons and rusted metals out of 10. I in my heart, it's a 10. I really, really love this episode, and the acting's fantastic. I think it needed to be banned. I wish it hadn't. I wish this was written by Martin Goldsmith, who writes one other Twilight Zone episode, which is just embarrassingly bad. It's about an unhappy married couple who like beat the crap out of each other, and then one kills the other. It's really relic of the era type stuff. And I think if Rod had written this instead of Mr. Goldsmith, I think he could have handled it with that little bit of care that it needed. So it came really close to being a masterpiece, and in a lot of ways it is. But I think it could have done damage where it didn't need to. So yeah, 8.5.
And that brings the episode combined to a 9.3, definitely in the upper echelons of the episodes we've watched. Mr. Serling, what are we going to be watching next week? What harrowing tale of devilish delights will you be bringing us in this upcoming episode?
You've probably heard of Gremlins in the Machine, but I bet you've never seen them on the machine. Next week we draw on the special Shut up, cats! Next week we draw on the special talents of William Shatner in a chilling study penned by Richard Matheson called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Don't chicken out.
And we'll be back next week. Please check us out on our YouTube. And remember, stay tolerant.